Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into a world of spies, gadgets, and gold.
Always up for a mission.
Today's target is none other than Goldfinger.
Ah, the gold standard of Bond films.
Exactly. 60 years later, people still call it the Bond film. So we're digging into what makes it tick.
Well, we've got intel from all over on Magazine, Empire Online, even frame-rated weighed in.
So reviews spanning decades, that's got to give us some perspective, right?
Absolutely. Plus, we've got a Treff Punk critique piece straight out of Germany, so it's not just the Anglophone take.
Nice. Different angles.
And of course, no deep dive is complete without some Wikipedia recon. Production details, reception back in the day, the full dossier.
Gotta have that background. What else are we working with?
Oh, we've got some multimedia, too. SLJ Productions did a whole YouTube breakdown.
I've always loved their insights.
And MovieWeb did a piece on why Goldfinger still resonates today.
Perfect. So it's not like Bond was invented with Goldfinger, but it seems to have perfected the formula, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's almost like Goldfinger gave us the blueprint for what a Bond film should be.
Right. You think about that pre-credit sequence alone. Wetsuit, explosives, then boom, he's in a tux. Like, nothing happened.
Seamless.
Yeah.
Empire Online calls it perfection for a reason. It introduces so many elements that became iconic to the franchise.
Like the Aston Martin DB5, all decked out with gadgets.
Exactly. And let's not forget the larger-than-life villain, the witty dialogue, that blend of action, humor, and sex appeal. Everything we now associate with Bond. SLJ Productions even argues that, for many fans, Goldfinger didn't just set a high bar.
It is the bar.
Spot on. And it's not all just spectacle, although those action sequences are pretty impressive. The script is smart. They put emphasis on Bond's intelligence.
It really is a duel of wits, as much as it is a physical showdown.
Absolutely. SLJ Productions actually points out how Bond's constantly outmaneuvering Goldfinger, the card game, the golf match, even when he's strapped to that table with the laser.
Bond's always thinking a few steps ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Resourceful, adaptable, thinking on his feet. That's what makes him a believable hero, someone we can actually root for.
If he was just some lucky daredevil, it wouldn't have the same impact. Speaking of impact, we got to talk about Sean Connery and Gert Frobe as Goldfinger. I mean, talk about on-screen chemistry.
It's electric. Many argue that this is Connery's most charismatic performance as Bond. He just embodies that effortless charm and confidence. But it works because Frobe gives us a Goldfinger who's grounded, menacing. Even Treff Punk the critic calls him chillingly captivating.
He really is. Goldfinger is obsessed with gold, obviously, but he's also a brilliant strategist, a businessman, almost a showman in a way.
He's got layers, which makes him a more compelling villain. You almost understand his motivations, even if you don't agree with his methods.
And speaking of memorable characters, Goldfinger introduced some of the most iconic figures in film history. Oddjob, for one.
Ah, Oddjob. That deadly bowler hat. The Guardian calls him well played. And they're not wrong. He's menacing, even with limited dialogue.
He's the ultimate strong, silent type. On Magazine even goes as far as labeling him the ultimate evil sidekick.
Which makes sense, since On Magazine also pointed out that his debut was basically silent.
And SLJ Productions makes a great point about how that silent menace makes Oddjob such a physical threat to Bond.
Which really adds to the tension when they finally square off.
Then there's, of course, Pussy Galore. That name alone makes her one of the most memorable Bond girls, but she's also got this independent streak that makes her stand out.
Oh, absolutely. On Magazine describes her as one of the most intriguing Bond women, and it was a different time. They even questioned if a lesbian could be converted by 007.
Times have definitely changed.
For sure. Even The Guardian noted that Honor Blackman was more bosomy than remembered on TV and rather less effective, so even her portrayal went through a transformation.
Interesting. But SLJ Productions brings up a really interesting point about that barn scene with Bond and Pussy Galore. They raise questions about consent and suggest the scene could have been filmed differently without compromising the story. It's fascinating how we view these films through a modern lens, but it also reminds us that even classics reflect the evolving values of society. Speaking of which, we've got to talk about Ken Adams' production design. I mean, that Fort Knox set is legendary.
The sheer scale and detail are incredible. The Guardian even points out that while these extravagant sets were definitely expensive, they were crucial to the film's visual impact.
They created a world that feels both believable and larger than life, which is Bond in a nutshell.
And then there's the sound design. So innovative. Goldfinger actually snagged the franchise's first Oscar for sound design.
Really?
Yeah. SLJ Productions highlights how those exaggerated sound effects, especially during the action scenes, made it so captivating. It wasn't just visually impressive, it was a full-on audio experience.
And let's not forget John Barry's score, especially that main theme sung by Shirley Bassey. Bold, brassy, instantly recognizable.
Pure Bond. A magazine said it was less of a song and more a statement of intent, which I think is perfect.
Couldn't agree more. And the impact of Goldfinger is undeniable. It really popularized the spy genre, inspired countless imitations, parodies, you name it. I mean, MovieWeb sums it up perfectly. They say that Goldfinger's blend of style, action, and humor became the blueprint, the benchmark, something other spy films haven't been able to top.
And The Guardian mentions the sheer number of spy films that hit theaters the following year. Like, over 20.
Yeah.
That's some serious influence.
It's wild to think that one film had such a ripple effect. So clearly, Goldfinger is more than just a good Bond film. It's a landmark achievement in cinema, and it's captivated audiences for generations.
But it also makes you wonder, is Goldfinger a product of its time, or does it actually transcend the 1960s?
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely be digging into further as we continue our deep dive. So we're back in the world of Goldfinger, shaken not stirred, of course.
Naturally.
It's amazing how a film set during the Cold War, with, let's be honest, some very 1960s views, still works for modern audiences.
It's got that staying power, doesn't it? Like we're all caught in Goldfinger's tractor beam. But
Yeah.
seriously, why does it hold up so well?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
I think, for one, the themes are pretty universal, even though they're rooted in that era.
Like Goldfinger's greed.
Exactly. I mean, insatiable greed, Bond fighting for justice, the allure of power. We're still grappling with those today, even if it looks different.
And you can't deny the style, those tailored suits, the cars, the locations. It's all incredibly visually appealing, even now.
You've got to hand it to Ken Adam, the production designer. He didn't just create sets, he created a world.
A world that fit Bond perfectly.
Right.
Right. Glamorous, but also dangerous.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about flashiness. Adam used these bold graphic compositions, almost like a comic book, you know. That's got to be part of why it still feels fresh.
Oh, for sure. And the gadgets. You can't talk about Goldfinger without the gadgets.
The Aston Martin DB5. Ejector seat, machine guns, the whole shebang. Still the ultimate spy car.
I don't know anyone who wouldn't want to take that for a spin.
It's that Goldfinger imagination, right?
Yeah.
Anything is possible. Like SLJ Productions makes the point that the film's success comes from this dedication to pure escapism.
Just pure fun.
Yeah. Doesn't take itself too seriously, lets you enjoy the thrills, the humor. It's entertainment, plain and simple.
Totally. Action, wit, style, all with a wink. And the pacing is something else. It's just go, go, go.
Incredibly efficient storytelling. Every minute feels important. It's like a masterclass in keeping the audience engaged, but without wasting a second.
And yet, even with all the action, there are those quieter character moments. We see Bond's doubts, his vulnerabilities, even grief.
Right. He's not just some invincible super spy. He's human. He's wrestling with his place in this dangerous world.
It gives the film a depth you don't always expect from an action flick. It's not just about the spectacle, it's about a man and his inner demons, which makes me think about the portrayal of women in the film.
Yeah, it definitely reflects the times, right? And some elements, like the name Pussy Galore, haven't aged well at all.
Not at all.
But even within those constraints, Goldfinger has some strong female characters.
Like Pussy Galore herself.
Yeah. She's a skilled pilot, she leads her own group, and she makes her own choices in the end. She goes against both Goldfinger and Bond.
She's not just sitting around waiting to be rescued, she's driving the plot forward.
Even Jill Masterson, despite her tragic ending, she shows agency in her limited screen time.
It's interesting to think about, right, that even in a 1960s action film, you could still have these complex female characters.
Even if they weren't always treated with the respect they deserved.
It shows how we can look at these films on different levels. The escapism is there, but they're also reflections of their time, for better or for worse.
Exactly. We can appreciate the craft while still acknowledging where they fall short.
Maybe that's part of what makes Goldfinger so enduring. It entertains us, but it also sparks these conversations. Makes us think.
But we can't forget to just enjoy the ride, too.
Oh, absolutely.
It's dazzling to watch. The characters are unforgettable. It's pure joy.
Sometimes a laser beam is just a laser beam, And a gold-painted woman is just a gold-painted woman.
We can overthink things. Sometimes it's good to sit back and enjoy the spectacle.
And Goldfinger definitely delivers on that. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch on the cultural impact of Goldfinger and the Bond franchise as a whole.
It's the elephant in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
This series has, at times, definitely perpetuated harmful stereotypes.
And contributed to a culture of, let's say, toxic masculinity.
Absolutely.
Right.
We can't ignore that. But like any cultural product, the franchise has evolved.
Later films have definitely become more nuanced in their portrayal of women.
And there's a greater awareness of the complexities of masculinity.
But the shadow of those earlier films, with their, objectification of women and glorification of violence, it's still there.
And that's why these conversations are so important. We can appreciate Goldfinger while also recognizing the problematic stuff. It's about finding that balance.
It is a tricky balance, but a necessary one. We can't just sweep things under the rug.
By having these discussions, we can learn from the past and hopefully create a better future.
For the franchise and for society as a whole.
Exactly.
But before we get too serious, let's remember that Goldfinger is, at its core, pure fun.
A celebration of adventure, ingenuity,
Yeah.
and a reminder that even facing a nuclear threat, there's always time for a martini. Shaken, not stirred naturally.
All right, so we've covered the brilliance of Goldfinger, and we've touched on some of its less than brilliant moments.
It's definitely a product of its time in some ways.
But now I want to talk about the aftermath. What kind of impact did this film actually have? It wasn't just a box office smash, it was a cultural earthquake.
Yeah, Goldfinger really infiltrated pop culture, redefined the spy genre, basically left a trail of golden breadcrumbs for other filmmakers to follow.
Like SLJ Productions said, Bond became a true phenomenon after this film.
It's true. Sales of the novels went through the roof, and like we mentioned before, a ton of spy films hit theaters the next year.
Over 20, wasn't it?
Something like that, yeah. It's like Goldfinger cracked the code for global obsession.
But it's funny because Goldfinger didn't invent the spy genre.
Not at all.
It just took those existing elements, the intrigue, the gadgets, the suave hero, and gave it this shot of cinematic adrenaline.
You're right. It just elevated the entire genre. And that formula, that Goldfinger formula, it became the blueprint.
Countless other films followed in its footsteps.
You had our man Flint, you had Matt Helm. Everyone was trying to ride that Bond wave.
Even the Beatles got in on the action.
Oh, yeah.
Their film Help.
Okay.
It's basically one big playful nod to Bond mania, and then there's the 67 Casino Royale.
A spoof?
Yeah, it simultaneously celebrated and made fun of the whole spy craze. It shows just how quickly Goldfinger permeated the culture.
It really did. And it's not even just the direct imitations. Goldfinger's influence is everywhere. Action films, comedies, even video games.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you see echoes of it in everything from True Lies to The Simpsons, even Austin Powers.
Exactly. Goldfinger created this visual language, this shorthand for a spy movie that we still recognize today.
And MovieWeb made a great point, how every Bond film since has tried to recapture that magic.
But none have quite managed to hit that same mark.
Goldfinger remains the gold standard.
The cinematic Mount Everest, if you will.
So many have tried to climb it, but...
few have reached the summit.
Which isn't to say the Bond franchise hasn't evolved. I mean, it's had to, right, to stay relevant.
Right. We've seen different actors step into the role, and the stories themselves reflect changing times.
But even with those changes, there's a core DNA, and it all goes back to Goldfinger. The action, the humor, the style, those amazing gadgets, the globe-trotting adventures, that's what makes a Bond film a Bond film.
It's true. Those are the constants.
And maybe that's why, even with all the conversation about its problems, James Bond, as a character, as a concept, endures. He taps into this primal need for adventure, that one person can make a difference.
And in a world that often feels messy and unpredictable, I think that's what we crave. That escapism. The hero who fights for good. Even the reminder that in the face of something like a nuclear threat, you can still enjoy a martini.
Well said.
Shaken, not stirred, obviously.
So where does that leave us? I think it means Goldfinger is more than just a film. It's a phenomenon, a landmark moment in cinema. It's a story that still captures our imaginations.
It can be enjoyed on so many levels. It's a spectacle. It's a time capsule of the 60s. It's even a starting point for conversations about representation and how we view gender.
It reminds us of the power of film, how it can move us, challenge us, and really leave a mark on our culture.
For sure.
So whether you're revisiting Goldfinger or maybe experiencing it for the first time, think about what resonates with you. How has it shaped your view of spy films?
And is Goldfinger really untouchable? Can future Bond films ever top it?
Those are questions worth pondering. But for now, we've reached the end of our mission. We've explored the world of Goldfinger, we've uncovered its secrets, and hopefully you've come away with a deeper understanding of this cinematic gem.
Absolutely.
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, the world is full of incredible stories just waiting to be discovered.